Contrary to what you might think, I actually really enjoy movies, and I enjoy particularly watching good movies. Challengers, Dune Part 2, La Chimera, just a few good ones I saw over the summer, but then I get to movies like Uglies, which really make me reevaluate if, in fact, I actually enjoy watching movies at all. Or more generally, if humans should have ever evolved ears or eyes or the ability to process complex thoughts at all. Frankly, Uglies itself is a bit of a relic of the past. Despite coming out basically a week ago, it would have fit neatly into the 2010s when it seemed like every other movie was a terrible adaptation of a young adult dystopian novel. But now it sticks out like a sore thumb in 2024, well after that genre has outstayed its welcome, and people have correctly deduced that most of those films were incredibly mediocre. And while better stories like The Hunger Games were able to relate to younger viewers and younger readers by telling stories that met them where they were at, but also used a lot of heart and a lot of subtlety, yeah, Uglies is gonna do absolutely none of that. The basic premise of Uglies is that in a dystopian society 300 years in the future, everybody is ugly until they turn 16, and then they get a pretty surgery that makes them pretty. And even after just hearing that concept, I've already rolled my eyes into the back of my skull. With the exception of the Hunger Games prequel, which came out somewhat recently that I actually really enjoyed, this movie represents a bygone genre, the YA dystopian novel adaptation, coming back out on the field. A past his prime quarterback trying for one more season before immediately getting pancaked by a much younger player. But maybe like Aaron Rodgers, this movie will secretly come back stronger because yes, it is basically a secret part 1 movie. It does not tell a complete story. And there's no indication of any of this, by the way. You just have to figure it out after you've already watched the entire thing. If you are going to explicitly plan out your movie into multiple installments, you owe it to the viewer to tell them that ahead of time and to give them a conclusive story in and of itself, obviously setting up for the longer story arcs. But of course, this movie doesn't even do that. And maybe they did this because the only thing less appealing than spending your evening watching a film called Uglies is spending it watching a movie called Uglies Part 1. And while my evening is already gone, yours doesn't have to be. So let me tell you why Uglies fails on so many levels and caused me to leave the theater, in this case my desk, both angry and bored. My name is Patrick, but my friends call me Pat, and if you like my videos and you like my content, consider subscribing. Only this amount of you are subscribed, more likes, more comments, gets this video out to more people, and I super duper appreciate it. And remember, I do read every comment, including all the angry ones that I've had to read on the last few videos, so if you feel bad for me, I'll take a like. I'm not picky. Thank you all so much. Couldn't do this without you. Heart back. By popular demand. The movie is based on a book with the same name, Uglies by Scott Westerfield, which came out in 2005, evidently not quite strong enough to make its debut in the 2010s when every YA dystopian novel was being adapted and when that genre of movie was actually popular. The movie was in talks to be made as early as 2006 before fizzling out, rekindling in 2020. And in 2020 it was picked up by a variety of production companies and producers, including Dan Spilo, who is probably most famous for being on Survivor before being kicked out for inappropriately touching both other contestants and somebody who was on the crew. And taking one look at his face, I can see that he needs the pretty surgery most of all, but that won't fix his repulsive personality. See? 4D chess by having him involved with this movie because it proves the lessons the movie is trying to teach. 4D chess, ladies and gentlemen. I'm only joking, of course, because this movie has almost no concrete messaging and the thematic depth of a very shallow puddle. The movie is directed by MCG. No. That's MTG, and she is signed up to direct God's Not Dead 6. There we go, that's the right one. I'm not super familiar with his work besides Charlie's Angels, but he's produced a fair amount of reputable, successful films, so by all means, he has a pretty good track record.
I am Pencilhead.
And I am son of Pencilhead.
We erase crime.
2 generations of...
However, the movie is written by 3 different people, and if it takes 3 people to adapt a movie from a book that's already been written, well, buckle up because we are in for a bumpy ride.
Too many cooks, too many cooks, too many cooks.
Our main character is Tally, played by Joey King, most famous for her roles in the Kissing Booth movies and for playing now internet icon Gypsy Rose Blanchard. By the way, if you read this story at all, I think it's crazy she got any prison time for getting out of that situation. I don't really know why she served any time, honestly, but, you know, at least post-prison, she gets to be an influencer. That's how we as a society were, like, giving back to her. We're like, all right, Gypsy Rose, you can be an icon. That's your penance for all your suffering. And now we get to watch your love triangle play out in real life on the internet. Tally, though, does not have Munchausen by proxy. Her burden to bear is that she's ugly.
Just because you're ugly doesn't mean you can be slow.
When I get longer legs, I'm going to destroy you.
And I'll say this right now, she's not ugly. No one in this movie who is supposedly an ugly is ugly. I think right away that's what irked me, because we also have Chase Strokes from the Outer Banks, and you're gonna tell me he's ugly? I'm gonna tell you that you're wrong. I think if the whole underpinning of your movie is that people are so ugly they need corrective pretty surgery, it's not a reach to think they should actually be ugly. But Patrick, you might say, it's all about social commentary. It's because they're too harsh on ourselves and we as a society have crazy beauty standards. By the way, I don't think anyone with that voice watches my video, but let's move past it. In response to that, I would say, okay, this story is primarily geared towards a younger audience, so I would hope that you would give Generation Alpha the credit of being able to handle a story talking about this that is more complex than calling people pretties and uglies. Although I am seeing a lot of clips of people huffing whipped cream at school on my feed these days, so perhaps my faith is a little bit misplaced. Chase Strokes' aforementioned character is named Paris.
Here's the million-dollar question.
Paris and Tolly have been besties for the resties, or, you know, in this case, being at the Ugly Academy for 4 years. He's turning pretty 2 months before she is, so there's a lot of nerves and anxiety because he'll be leaving before her, and what's it gonna be like when we're pretty and you're pretty and I'm not, yada yada yada. But I think it's at this point we should talk about, and then mock, this movie's pretty pathetic attempts at world building. The very first part of the movie, before we even get to meet our characters face to face, is an exposition dump narrated by Tolly, where we learn that before this society that we're going to see, the old society, which is our society, destroyed themselves by using too much fossil fuel and not having renewable energy. And how this society we're about to see, which is basically the only thing in this society is just an unnamed city, which, you know, for fun, I'm going to call Pretty City, and how this entire way of life is supported by the fact that they created a genetically modified renewable energy flower, which they planted everywhere to give them access to unlimited energy. And look, it does get kind of addressed later in the movie, but I find it funny how even in our works of fiction, even our dystopian works of fiction depicting a society 300 years in the future, we're going to create this incredible genetically modified flower before we actually just build more solar plants and build more wind farms. Ouch! I just cut myself! Oh, you should use a Band-Aid. How about I just pour some oil on my wound? What? No, just use a Band-Aid. You know, I'm just gonna put some natural gas on it. I hear that's better than oil. But in order to fix the very human problems of war and sectarian violence, everybody in this society gets pretty surgery when they turn 16 to make them pretty.
Everyone, on their 16th birthday, undergoes a life-changing operation to become their most perfect self.
A mermaid.
And when
To
everyone
become
is
a
perfect,
mermaid. Look, I get that in dystopian YA novels, you have to suspend your disbelief. Sure, world of Lois Lowry's The Giver, I can totally buy that everybody seeing in black and white somehow magically gets rid of the concept of race. But the premise of this movie is just so bizarre. Are you seriously claiming that if everyone was yassified, there would be world peace? There's also the question of who's running this society. We basically never get any explanation. We don't ever see any farmers anywhere. We barely see any robots, if at all. We have no idea how this supposed post-scarcity society is actually supporting itself and running. Who is running this society? We also don't get any explanation for why humanity is supposedly just in this one mega city, which looks like a rainbow unicorn vomited all over Hong Kong. And when we do get a brief glimpse of Pretty City, it basically just seems like they sit around all day, drink, and party all the time. How do they support themselves? And in better YA dystopian media properties like The Hunger Games, it actually makes sense that the capital is the way it is, because we know they're being supported by multiple different districts spread across all of North America.
Faster you die, faster you lose. Life halves the price for one.
And I'm so sorry, but I cannot go an entire video talking about dystopian YA novels without referencing Joey Graceffa's Hunger Games song, the breakout hit, The Arena. I bought that song on iTunes, and I feel ancient. But in Uglies, who's propping society up? Who's running things? Who's making it go? Because it certainly isn't the Uglies. The Uglies are not a downtrodden and persecuted minority group, nor are they an underclass who serve the pretties. No, they're neither of these things, because both of those ideas would have allowed you to address things like race or class, both things that, in my opinion, probably a little bit more important than beauty standards, but at any rate, it's neither of those things. The Uglies represent something else. They represent the most persecuted strata of society. I am, of course, naturally talking about everybody under the age of 16. Cannot say that one with a straight face. Not that I can really ever say anything on this channel with a straight face for obvious reasons. Because everybody gets the pretty surgery when they turn 16, everybody who is not yet 16 is considered an ugly. So that's who makes up the Uglies in this movie.
I'm 16, starting to find my way. Got a new job, gonna start at the mall today.
There is so much yearning and adolescent angst infused into the first half of the script that it is almost comical. Actually, it's not even almost. I'm just going to say it's comical. Here's a bit of the opening monologue to prove what I mean.
But then there are the rest of us awaiting our operation. Until then, we're less than. Ignored. People call us uglies.
What do you mean the rest of you are left behind and you feel less than? You feel oppressed and persecuted because you go to school? Because you're not 16 yet? Look, I'm not ignorant to the fact that this movie is touching on a very real emotion that most people of that age actually feel. Because people who are under 16 often do feel like that. I remember feeling like that myself. Feeling like I was constrained by social pressures and academic stressors. And, oh, that kind of rhymed, didn't it? But most importantly, feeling lesser than the actual adults when I just wanted to be taken seriously and treated as an equal. And if you wanted to take it even further, you could even say the age of 16 is intentional because that's the age when most Americans learn how to drive a car, and in 95% of America, you basically need to drive a car to have any sort of independence or freedom at all. Sorry, had to put a little anti-car rhetoric in there for you. Say what you will about Pretty City and their dystopian, terrible society, but it looks like they've got a lot of walkable pedestrian areas. I'm just saying, there's a good and the bad to this evil government, which we'll learn more about. But listen, there are a lot of car-free spaces. But here's my real issue with this incredibly unsubtle framing of people who are above the age of 16 and under the age of 16 as pretties and uglies, respectively. The kids deserve better stories than this, and frankly, so does everybody else. This has been one of the more popular Netflix movies ever since it came out, which leads me to believe that a large portion of the audience are actually people above the age of 15. And this kind of makes sense knowing Netflix's business model, since in this movie it's portraying people who are under the age of 16 as essentially the downtrodden Irish teens from West Side Story. It's highly unlikely that those kids will have access to their parents' credit cards and be involved in the decision to keep Netflix, cancel it, get a new subscription, whatever. Officer Krupke, I need my parents to get me Netflix. Can we cut that? Can we cut? The framing of this story as to so desperately pander to moody 15-year-olds frankly does those moody 15-year-olds an incredible disservice to serve them a story of, oh, kids, ain't it crazy, ain't it bad being under 16? You probably feel real poopy about that. It kind of sucks, doesn't it? And yes, in a lot of ways it does suck being under 16 and being in that time of your life, but do yourself a favor. Go watch Dead Poets Society, or Ferris Bueller's Day Off, or The Hunger Games, or how about literally anything else? Okay, well, maybe not literally anything else. But anyway, speaking of 15-year-olds, Paris, no longer 15. He turns 16, gets his pretty surgery, and goes on his merry way to Pretty City, leaving Tally all alone. With her best friend, and frankly someone who she has a crush on, completely gone from her life and not responding to her text, she has a lot of uncertainty, and dare I say, she's shivering with
anticipation.
She makes plans with him a month after his birthday to meet him at their old favorite spot, but he doesn't show, so naturally she decides she wants to break into Pretty City. And when she arrives in Pretty City, We see a lot of beauty, obviously. We also are treated to a very bad cover of Such Great Heights, which, you know, the cover itself is not bad, but it just completely does not fit the moment at all, and just the original would have been absolutely, in so many ways, so much better for this moment, but whatever. We also see a lot of people who basically look like they're completely gone, just zooted off of a bunch of sedatives. But then she finds Paris, who basically kind of barely even recognizes her and is very nonchalant about the fact that he hasn't talked with her at all since he came to Pretty City, and we see that he's healed the scar on his hand, which was a symbol of their friendship and something they both promised they were going to keep, because for whatever reason we see via flashback they made a blood oath to each other to solidify their friendship. You can, don't do that.
Best friends forever.
Oh no, don't touch it! Blood to blood. You can get a lot of diseases that way. But in order to talk to him, she's had to remove her mask, and the system finally catches up as we see an incredibly sophisticated alarm alerting everybody that there's an ugly in the vicinity, which, you know, I think there's a lot of meme potential for that image, but we never see this alarm system come up again, which is just so awesome because she is going to break into Pretty City again, and there are just not alarms there, even though she's going to be breaking into government building. Okay. Move on. Cut. As she's fleeing from the authorities and it looks like she's about to get caught, she is saved at the last moment by Shay, played by Brienne Ju, and the two quickly become very fast friends, sneaking out of the dorms repeatedly and just having a lot of bonding moments in the next 20 or so minutes of the movie. And maybe I'm off base here, but I feel like this damn movie queer-baited me a little bit. I know, get up the tweet. Being queer-baited by a Netflix movie is like losing a game of chess to a dog, and maybe I would lose a game of chess to a dog. I haven't played a lot of chess, although I do think I could probably beat the average dog, but a particularly sly cat might get the better of me. They do spend a large chunk of the movie together when they're here in the Ugly Academy, getting to know each other, becoming incredibly close, which is something that really kind of only intensifies as the movie gets to a certain point. Until then, she kind of picks a different love interest. I don't want to say it's random, but it did come as a little bit of a shock. And her entire character motivation for at least half the movie, if not over that, is just saving Shay. And look, I get that the average teenage girl doesn't have a complete, all-encompassing, and enveloping fear of being called gay by their peers that the average teenage boy has, and so that allows them to actually form close friendships. But still, and if you've actually seen the movie, please let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I didn't read any other reviews before I wrote this, so maybe I'm the only person who thought this, or maybe I'm not. I don't think I am, though. I think other people have to be thinking this. They share the same birthday, and right as they're on the eve of their pretty surgery, Shay reveals to Tali that she will not, in fact, be getting the pretty surgery. She is instead going to be running away to join a community called The Smoke. The next day, when Tali goes to get her surgery, she is confronted by a man with a very comically deep voice.
Tali Youngblood.
Wait, that's such a kind of a smexy voice. And taken to a special area of the government, which is literally just referred to as special circumstances. Like, that's the whole name of the building. It's not relevant to point it out, I just think it's a little silly. She's then given a mission by Dr. Cable, played by Orange is the New Black legend Laverne Cox, although technically she is introduced earlier in the movie during a school assembly, as she is like a kaiju type hologram.
This reminds me of assembly in grade school. And assembly was the only part of school I ever liked.
But Dr. Cable reveals that Shay is in danger because she is under the spell of an evil, rebellious leader named David, who is plotting to destroy the city with a weapon that he has. And no offense to the Davids of the world, but David is not really a name that strikes fear into the hearts of men. It's a name that strikes fear into the heart of me because I once had a very terrible manager named David. And this is not a joke. In the employee manual, there were about 100 bullet points, and on one of them, the only one that was bolded in the entire document, it said 64, beware David. He is not a reasonable man. I ultimately would come to believe this when one time he asked one of my coworkers to literally trap a bat that was flying around loose in the hotel.
Well, the feds or whatever heard
that he's gonna be here today. So they set up a trap for him.
All this is to say, Dr. Cable has convinced Tally that she has to rescue Shay from the evil David and then tell the government where exactly the smoke actually is, signaling them with the necklace that they give her. She agrees, and then she goes to find the smoke. And this probably should have been a warning sign because we are about halfway through the movie and really, not a lot of things have happened. This really should have been the first warning sign that this movie was going to kick me in the nuts and not do what every movie should set out to do, that being tell a complete story, but we'll get there. She arrives at a camp just outside the smoke and meets Shay as well as the enigmatic David played by Keith Powers. For whatever reason, she pretty much immediately spills her plan as to why she has come there to Shay, like, I'm coming here to rescue you and get you out. Shay, a person who does not want to be rescued, convinces Tally to basically just give this place a chance, to which Tally agrees. She is not exactly a master manipulator. And as I mentioned a little bit before, there are a lot of truly baffling musical choices both on her way to get to the smoke, but also just kind of throughout the entire movie. There's a lot of songs that feel way too modern for a movie that is supposedly going to be set in the 24th century. You don't want things that are just incredibly 21st century sounding. You want things to be either distantly retro or very futuristic. There are also just a lot of songs that do not fit the moods that are being created at all. It just, like, you have to be really bad with a soundtrack for me to notice. Like, I love sound. I love audio. Like, most of the time, music in movies is gonna be at least okay. This was well below that. Anyway, this is when we learn that members of the smoke have to actually burn the flowers that are planted by the city because the flowers actually completely destroy the ecosystem for the smoke in the surrounding areas. Consider my disbelief suspended as they take to the skies in a solar-powered helicopter and start using a flamethrower to burn the field of flowers. Why would the pretty city use these flowers that destroy the environment instead of solar panels or wind turbines? Why? The movie thinks it's being done deliberately so that communities outside of the city are forced to join and forced to go through the surgery and whatever, but when we finally get to the smoke, we learn that it's basically just a small medieval village with 30 people. So it really begs the question why this government feels the need to create an evil terraforming program at all to essentially stamp down like a few small villages. We don't even know if there are any other villages. I'm assuming there are, but this village has literally got like 30. And you know what? Trying to calculate and discern the logic of a bad movie is like staring too long into the abyss. It is already staring back at me. Let's move on. Shay falls out of the helicopter on accident, causing Tally to heroically dive down and save her. Queer bait. Anyway, she gets the trust of David and some of the other villagers, and then is taken back to the smoke, where she very quickly becomes enamored with this place, despite the fact that it just looks like an average pre-industrial serfdom-coded village. Look, I get it. Oh, wow, they don't have to worry about physical appearances, and they can be themselves, and they can think freely. Listen, there is no way in hell I am leaving a society where I can conjure up a cupcake out of nothing to go to this industrial society where I have to recycle railroad tracks and eat boiled carrots. It's just not happening. Tally then eventually gets to meet David's parents, where we finally get the reveal of why exactly this dystopian evil government is truly evil. We know it's going to happen, we just don't know what the particulars are. Well, apparently, once you get pretty surgery, which by the way is a surgery that does lead to occasional fatalities, which is something the government covers up, another point for evil government, but it causes lesions to appear in your frontal cortex, which will make you happy but dull. You won't be able to think clearly, but you'll kind of just be vibing along with existence anyway.
We won't go quietly. The Legion can count on that.
You won't really care about anything at all, which is why the people we saw in Pretty City, including her friend Paris, just mostly seem to be vibing, not really particularly bothered with the world. And it's not an accidental side effect, it's actually the entire purpose of the surgery itself, and it was realized by David's parents, and once they realized it, they decided they had to flee the city, and now they're back there working on a cure, but they need some nanobots or whatever from the city that they don't have, so they can't fully cure it yet. So to answer the question posed by the beginning of the movie, yes, if you yassified everybody, you actually would just cause world peace, because everybody would be too busy obeying the government and drinking to really start any sort of trouble.
Some civil servants are just like my loved ones.
And you know, when I heard this dystopian government was doing something unethical, I was shocked. Shocked, I tell ya. But my question then becomes, why don't you just do this from birth? Like, you feel like you need to justify it to your citizens. Like, hey, you're doing this surgery so you can get golden eyeballs and a killer jawline. Just do it when they're born. I mean, I personally, like, I don't even remember anything from, like, before the age of 12. So I think you'll be fine. But speaking of someone who won't be fine, David's dad, alongside the rest of the Smoke who have just been captured. After Tally has learned about all the evil things the government is doing, she takes her tracker necklace and throws it into the fire, not knowing that by doing that, it actually activated the tracker and told the government exactly where everybody was. So a bunch of soldiers come to the Smoke and capture and round everybody up. This also includes a super yassified Paris, who's gotten the mega pretty surgery to become both prettier and better at murder. They destroy and burn down the town and then round everybody up, and then Paris executes David's dad in what is a rare, but in my opinion was pretty appreciated form of PG-13 violence. The government then puts everybody in a ship and takes them to Pretty City, where they're going to all be turned into pretties against their will, with the exception of David and Tally, who have escaped.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too.
David thinks that Tally has betrayed them all, which is, frankly, you know, a pretty rational thing to think, which is very unfortunate because they'd just been kissing 10 minutes earlier, which really, you know, I was queer baited.
No.
Makes you beautiful.
No.
Just once, I'd like to see gay people in main roles, not as the annoying sidekicks who are always unhappy, but that's just me. Still, he manages to forgive her, and they both go into the city and to the Uglies student part, where they start a student rebellion, break into the government prison, and free everybody before confronting Dr. Cable. And if it sounds like I'm rushing describing all this to you, I'm really not, because all this happens in the span of about 10 minutes, none of it really feeling particularly well set up or established, and none of it feeling particularly thought out at all. Very rushed. And speaking of something that feels very rushed, let me talk about the extensive use of green screen throughout this movie. A lot of the sequences that are heavily using the green screens really look terrible, and I think that's both a function of budget and time, if not perhaps a combination of the two. But listen, if you're going to have multiple hoverboarding sequences, you need to allocate the resources to make them actually look good. And if you're not going to do that, you need to have fewer of those sequences, because they really just do not look good. And there are other things, it's not just the hoverboarding. There are multiple instances, because this film uses a lot of green screens in a lot of different contexts. A lot of the time they look fine, but sometimes they really look out of place. It's also a very joyless way to make a film, in my opinion, but whatever. If you're going to do it, at least have the decency to make it look somewhat presentable, like most of the Marvel movies. Although, granted, this movie almost certainly did not have the budget of one of those things. But back to our confrontation, where Dr. Cable is giving an incredibly uninspired speech, which is revealing probably the largest problem this movie has. The writing is absolutely terrible.
You'll be happier this way.
But I won't be me.
No. But you sure will be pretty.
I think the talent does a fine job with the lines that they're given and the script that they're given, but good lord, think of the children. They deserve tightly written and clever dialogue that sounds like it was actually said by a real human being too, just like the rest of us. I'm unsure of how many of the lines are just lifted directly from the book, which I also have a pretty big issue with that I'm about to get to, but either way, it just doesn't really sound that good. Most of the dialogue is just not great. The lines are so bad that in many instances, although this movie isn't supposed to be a comedy, it definitely becomes one.
You'll certainly be prettier without those squinty eyes.
I was worried. You're never late.
Yeah, I don't know. Things are just different here.
It makes me feel like maybe I am just ugly.
Anyways, every other resident of the Smoke escapes the facility, but somehow our heroes, Tally, David's mom, all get cornered by a hyped-up Paris who then forces them into the surgery pods as Dr. Cable watches menacingly. We also see that Shay got the surgery before they could rescue her, and then was subsequently turned into a Cyberpunk 2077 character. See, can I make a reference to that? Has it earned back its goodwill? I haven't really played the game since launch when it melted my computer. But speaking of melting, dang, I am am killing it with the segues today. One of the escaped members of the Smoke, who actually is kind of not a main character, but a supporting character. I just haven't talked about him because he is the exact same type of archetype that you see in every YA movie of like I don't trust you. You know, the second in command to the main guy who just hates our protagonist for no reason. So cookie cutter. But anyway, he takes the helicopter and puts a flamethrower through the room and saves everybody from the Pretty surgery.
A man has fallen into the river in
Pretty
City. Start the new rescue helicopter. Hey!
Then they escape up to the roof, but Paris follows them. And then David and Paris fight, but David gets absolutely destroyed, you know. I wouldn't blame Tally if she got the ick after watching that terrible display, but Tally eventually takes her hoverboard and whacks him from behind, causing Paris to fall to his death. Probably not. First rule of movies like this, if you don't see a character die on screen, they're probably not dead. David's mom, who I should probably call by her actual name at this point, which is Maddie. Before they escaped that room that was on fire, Maddie grabbed the necessary lab component to make the cure. But the problem is they don't have anybody to test this on, and they don't want to do it against anyone against their will, which, like, you are living in a dystopian society. I think you may have to bend the rules of medical ethics a little bit, but that's my opinion. But in an act of selfless heroism, we see Tally bravely volunteer to go test the cure herself. So she goes to get the Pretty surgery, and then we see her in the penthouse where she lives, but she has, like, the scar from her hand, so that's still there. But honestly, we have no idea whether or not she's actually taken the cure, whether or not it worked, and then the movie just ends. Yep, it just ends. Wait, what? Oh, this is a 2-part movie? They've set up a sequel? You're going to hell. I'm not joking, it just ends. So many questions. What happened with the rest of the Smoke? Did Paris survive the fall? What about the evil Dr. Cable? What about Maddie? What about David? What about literally any character that we've spent the last 90 minutes following any of those stories? Do we get any conclusions? No. Do we get any resolutions? You're not gonna find that in Uglies. And going off a summary of the 2006 book, apparently this is how that book ended, but that doesn't make it okay. You cannot leave multiple different story threads barely, if at all, resolved and just say, well, I know you just read 400 pages or you watched this stupid movie, just read the next book. Just watch the next movie. That is so, oh my god, I am so angry actually just thinking about it. I didn't think I was that upset at the time, and this is making it worse. This is making it worse. You cannot just do that for the first movie in your series. You can get a little bit of leeway if it's like the penultimate book and you're really just trying to get people attached, but like take a look at Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know why I use the British term for it, and take a look at the Hunger Games, the first one. They both are obviously setting up longer trends and stories that are going to get resolved, but they tell complete stories in those books. This is just so lazy, this is so greedy, this is disrespectful of both your audience's time, and frankly of their intelligence as well. What do I think of Uglies? I think it's about the worst thing a movie can be, a waste of time. Drew Gooden has recently said we waste a lot of time in our lives. This fact is patently true. But movies are supposed to be a safe haven. They're supposed to be above this type of craven, attention-grabbing bullshit. They're supposed to be the collective efforts of hundreds of people striving, working hard together to create great art and tell great stories. Uglies does none of that. Themes of beauty standards, individuality, and conformity are all told incredibly clumsily and with no resolution, which I should have expected that from a movie that has the audacity to say, we have two types of people in society. We've got the uglies and the pretties, and just dares me not to laugh in their face. I'm getting a little heated. I'm gonna dial it down a little bit. It's a story that's too simplistic, even for a younger audience, and also especially for the audience that's probably watching it on Netflix. It tells half of a story. Actually, even less than that. It tells a third of a story. It is less fulfilling than if you literally just cut to black in the middle of a sentence. I'm just kidding, this ain't The Sopranos. I've still got a couple more things to say. I try to provide positives For every single movie I review, even the really, really terrible conservative media, I do try to point out what I liked about it. And for this movie, I'm really struggling. Beyond saying I think the cast did fine given what they were working with, it's hard for me to really say anything more. Uglies has a poor structure, it has poor writing, it has poor cinematography, and it tells a poor story. But if you're forcing me to say something that I did enjoy about the movie, I thought the graphic design, because that's what it is, it's all computer generated, the graphic design of the city actually looked pretty good. And in telling you that, I basically feel like how I did when my mom forced me to apologize to her friend's son that I didn't really like, but the city is nice. I did enjoy the city, and it's a nice contrast with Ugly World or whatever it's called. I don't think it even came up in the movie. Yeah, the city's a pretty city. It lives up to its name that I made up. But that's gonna do it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, please comment. The more you do that, the more this video gets out to more people and the more videos I can create for you guys. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Have you seen it? What I do like about reviewing these Netflix things is I feel like more people can, talk with me about their experiences in the comments. What did you think? Did you read the book? I've been told that the book is a lot better than the movie, and I'm almost certainly inclined to agree with that. But yeah, if you like this video and you like my content, consider subscribing. 1 to 2 new videos every single week. I love you all. Couldn't do it without you. And as always, my name is Patrick, but my friends call me Pat, and I will see you in the next one.